Hello and welcome back to Hydroponics Daily, your go-to podcast for everything soilless cultivation. I'm your host, Dr. Russell Sharp, the founder of Utrema Limited, and we manufacture novel fertilizers, interesting biostimulants, and organic biopesticides. However, today I'm going to talk about a method you can use to vastly reduce the amount of pesticides you use, whether they're organic biopesticides or normal pesticides, and massively reduce your bills for biological control. This is a really good episode, so stay tuned. This is it's going to help small growers, medium growers, and large-scale growers, but there is a fair amount to understand, so let's get into it. So today's episode is a hack. It's a way of not growing your own biological control, but certainly, well, sort of. So what I'm going to tell you today is when you buy biological controls, particularly or exclusively predatory mites, there's a way to culture these so that you can keep them multiplying and growing and reproducing. And so you don't need to keep on buying more and more from the same manufacturer. So what it is you buy the species you want in. So you choose the particular type of predatory mite you want. Now that will depend on your crop. It will depend on where the pest is, and it will determine by the environmental conditions and lots of other factors. So you have to make sure you choose the right predatory mite, because some predatory mites only eat certain pests. Some only live in the soil, some only live on leaves, some will only hunt on flowers, some will only grow at a certain temperature or humidity, and so make sure you get the right predatory mite. Now, there are a few that live in the soil and eat fungus gnats and root aphids. There are some that live on the leaves and will eat thrips, aphids, mainly spider mites, other types of mite pests. There's things called Swirsky mites that eat a number of different pests, and there's some that will only exclusively feed on one type of pest. And so you really want to make sure that you get the right one. Now, what you may not realize is when you buy predatory mites, they come on a grow medium, and they aren't feeding on that bran or that pollen that's in there. What they're actually feeding on is the flower mites or other types of detritivore mites. Another species of mite is in there, and they're eating that other species of mite normally. And so you can use this to your advantage, because you can start growing these detritivore mites that live on things like bran or pollen or other types of plant material, and then just use that as a sort of like feedstock for your predatory mites. So I've done this in the past and bought predatory mites once and then not had to buy any more throughout the whole of the year and had no pest and disease problems in my greenhouse. So it's a fantastic way of doing it. So what you do is you go to an animal feed store and you buy a bag of bran. Now, you might only be able to get a 25 kilo bag, but it's not going to cost you that much money. It's probably only going to cost you about £20, $20, €20. So you are buying a big bag, but it's not going to be too expensive. It's certainly cheaper than the predatory mites that you've already bought. And you want to store that somewhere very, very dry and nowhere near your grow room, and certainly nowhere near your predatory mites. Take a scoopful, put it in a sealed container. So depending on how many mites you want, think about how big the container of predatory mites was that you bought. So you might want a container that's 4 times the size of that. You don't need to worry about air holes or anything like that, because you're going to be opening it up and checking on it every now and again. So put it in there and then take it to your grow room or your facility. Add a good dollop of the predatory mites from the container that you've purchased on the internet or from a supplier, and then just put the lid on, seal it right on what it is, and then the container that you bought from of predatory mites, just apply them in your grow room as you would normally. Shake them around on the plants. So about maybe 20% has gone into this container with the bran. And what will happen is You might want to add a tiny bit of moisture in there as well, so it doesn't get too dry. And then the flower mites that are in there, the sacrificial mites, they'll start to feed on the bran. And as they do that, they'll grow and they'll multiply very, very quickly, especially if you keep them warm. And then the predatory mites will feed on them as you go. And so you'll have both species increasing in number. And then once you start to see a change in the bran, now if you've got a dissecting microscope or a hand lens, you can monitor this very easily. But if you've not, then you can just wait for it to, you can sort of see the decomposition. As long as it's not fungal growth, don't want it too wet. You want it very nice and dry. You'll start to see them moving, and you can massively increase the population of the predatory mites. You can keep it going, add some fresh bran to a new container and do it. And then again, you can add the bran, the one that's grown really well, add about 80% to your grow room, and then take 20% and restock and reseed fresh bran. Now, the reason you don't want to take the whole bag of bran and put it in your grow room or your greenhouse or wherever it is you're growing is because the whole 20 kilos will get infested with the flower mites, and you'll just get it all decomposing and rotting and degrading, composting almost at once, which means you'll have loads of predatory mites, but might be overcome with flower mites and predatory mites on your produce. And in your grow rooms, you might start itching because there will be mites everywhere if you're not careful, and they'll be all over your surfaces and things like this. So you don't want that. You also don't want to do this in your house. If you've got a grow room in your house, you don't want to keep this bran anywhere near where you might be storing pasta or flour or rice, because these mites will eat that. And so you need to be careful not to do this in a situation where you've got a food store, because they'll infest the carbohydrate-based dry food. These are the same mites that you get in flour mites that's become a real problem. So do that. The reason I say go to an animal feed store and buy the bran as well is because the bran there is not treated with any preservatives. And if you say you bought like bran for breakfast cereal, for example, that bran, in my experience, you won't get flower mites growing on it because of the preservatives used. And it's a scary thought that, these mites will not touch food that is made for human consumption. They'll only eat food that's designed for animal feed. I've tried growing these sacrificial mites on loads and loads of different feedstocks, and I found pollen and bran were the best by far. You can harvest pollen from the wild. So there's a company called Copperts, and they do bulrush pollen, but I think bran is just as good. But what else you could do is you can, if you're using predatory mites for fungus gnats or any sort of root-based pest, then you can mix the bran in with cocoa and they'll feed. And then the predatory mites will that are used to being in soil or compost, they will grow nicely in that. So it has to be a bit more moist, but you don't want to be to the point where it's starting to get fungal decomposition. You want it to be the point where it's the predatory mite, the detritivore mites, the flower mites eating the bran, and then the soil-dwelling mites are eating them. So that one's a bit more difficult, but it is still possible, and I've done it many a time and had no issues with fungus gnats when I've done that. So talking myself out of you purchasing biopesticides from utrema.co.uk, but hopefully this shows that you can trust my word when it comes to what is a good product to use and what's not a good product to use, and know that I've got your interests as a grower, and I put that first. Always put that first at Utrema, whether you're a farmer, a horticulturalist, or a hydroponic grower, whether it's small or large. And as I say, this technique can be used for any sort of grower. You could use this for large scale farming, or just houseplants, or anything really. The reason why biocontrol is not used on large scale farms and large scale crops is because it's just too expensive. The companies that are selling these products, these biocontrol agents, they charge a serious amount for horticulturalists and hydroponic growers and greenhouse growers to use these products. So they can't just put a really, really low price for farmers to use them in broad acre. But you could, in theory, use this method to, a farmer could do 100 kilos of bran and control all their mite pests in an orchard, or if they have a a issue on a field crop with mites or thrips or aphids or anything like that, they could do this. So let me know if you want to try it. Let me know if you've done anything similar in the past. I think this is a brilliant hack, one of the best hacks in hydroponics, to be honest. That means that you don't have to keep on going back and buying more predatory mites. You're probably infringing somebody's patent somewhere, but if you are, good luck for them to try and prove that you are, because you're not selling these products. And at the end of the day, they've got to prove that you are infringing it. You don't have to tell them anything. And so I wouldn't worry. These are $1 billion plus companies, anyone who's involved in biocontrol. And there aren't many small scale companies. They're all leveraged. They're all publicly traded companies, I think, all of them. So yeah, I don't think anyone would be losing sleep if you did a small scale batch production of beneficial mites. So let me know if you think this is a good idea or a bad idea. I've used it in the past and think it's a brilliant idea, and I thought I'd share it with you as well. All right, if you've got any tips as well, if you've tried it and you've got any other ways of growing beneficial insects, then I'd love to know. I've tried to grow ladybirds larvae in the past using similar methods, and lacewings, but they're very, very difficult. Anything that has a complicated life cycle, really difficult. Anything that pupates, really difficult. Mites are dead easy because they lay eggs and they hatch into a mite and they just grow into a bigger mite. They might add an extra pair of legs here now and again, but they're very, very simple compared to something like a ladybird, which you only have to look at and it dies. I've said before, I think ladybirds are rubbish as biocontrol agents. And if you want to prove me wrong, let me know. But that's been Hydroponics Daily for today. A brilliant hack for vastly reducing your biocontrol and your pest control costs in hydroponics. If you found this useful, and if, I think this is a cracking hack, please leave a Apple podcast review because it helps the podcast tremendously. And if you want more brilliant hacks like this, then you want me to keep going with the podcast past into 2026, then please do leave an Apple podcast review. If you're not an Apple podcast, don't bother leaving a review. It doesn't help. Just make sure you follow the podcast and check out untreated.co.uk because we've got a load of amazing products and most of them are completely compatible with beneficial insects and applying them, or certainly can be applied right before you apply beneficial insects, and to things like lime sulfur we sell, which is an organic sterilizing agent, but the beauty of it is there's no residual action. So it just breaks down into plant nutrients and then you can apply beneficials the next day. Whereas most fungicides or insecticides, you need to have like a cooling off period for weeks and weeks and weeks, because more often than not, beneficial mites are more susceptible to insecticides and miticides than the actual pest mite. So, or pest insect. All right. That's enough for me today. Hope you like this episode and I'll see you again tomorrow. Goodbye.